Population growth is a core assumption of modern economics. GDP rises because people work and spend. Housing markets expand because migrants move in. Services exist because there are customers. No growth, no demand. But what if entire cities were not just slowing down? What if they were shrinking permanently? Today, we're going beyond headlines like migration trends change or young people move to cities. We're talking about U.S. cities already experiencing irreversible population decline, places where the loss of people is so deep that the effects are permanent, structural, and quietly devastating. This isn't remote rural decline. This isn't young people leaving for jobs. This is cities where the population contraction is now a defining characteristic of their identity and where property values, schools, services, and community life cycles are being rewritten as a result. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just where this is happening, but why it's happening and who it will hit hardest next. Understanding permanent population, decline population. Decline can happen slowly or suddenly. Sometimes it's gradual. Young people leave for education. Jobs disappear. Older residents pass away. If new residents replace them, the cycle stays stable. But if new residents do not arrive, population decline becomes self-reinforcing. Fewer people leads to fewer jobs, leads to fewer services, leads to even fewer people. That's not a temporary blip. That's a downward spiral. And that spiral affects real estate in deep, permanent ways. Houses have fewer buyers. Schools lose funding. Healthcare services thin out. Businesses' close tax bases shrink. Infrastructure deteriorates. What we are about to explore are cities where this spiral has already begun. Number 1. Detroit, Michigan. When America's Motor City lost its momentum. Detroit is one of the most famous examples, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. Ask most people about Detroit, and they think of abandonment, crime, or decline in the 1970s and 1980s. But that misses the real story. Detroit's population collapse is structural and ongoing. At its peak in 1950, Detroit had nearly 1.85 million residents. Today, it hovers around 640,000, a loss of more than 60% of its population. That's not a recession. That's not a cycle. That's a city losing its reason to exist. Automotive jobs left. Factories closed. Tax revenues collapsed. As taxes dropped, services deteriorated. As services deteriorated, residents left. It became a self-reinforcing machine. Here's the part that matters most for property values. A shrinking population means fewer buyers. Not less demand. Real demand decline. When a city loses people, it loses the base demand that supports housing prices. Homes that once sold in weeks now sit for months. Vacant houses are common. Neighborhoods become unstable. Property values don't crash in a single event. They drift downward over years as buyers disappear. Detroit isn't just a case of decline. It's a template of permanent contraction. Number 2. Buffalo, New York. Small decline, big consequences. Buffalo's story looks different. It's not dramatic. It's not headline-grabbing. It's quiet. In the mid-20th century, Buffalo was a thriving industrial hub. Steel, rail, manufacturing. Today, its population has stabilized lower than peak levels. Gone are the days of explosive growth. What makes Buffalo a case study in permanent decline is stagnation after contraction. Buffalo lost population steadily from 1950 to 2000. Unlike booming cities, it never regained that momentum. Lower tax base leads to fewer services. Fewer services leads to weaker attractions for new residents. Weaker attractions leads to more people leave. Buffalo never collapsed like Detroit, but it lost velocity. And velocity matters. In real estate terms, velocity means how quickly homes sell. How many buyers are in the market? How confident lenders feel? Without population momentum, velocity dries up. Homes may still sell, but they sell slower and often at lower prices. This is the quiet kind of decline no one talks about, but it's as real as any headline collapse. Number 3. Rochester, New York. Once a tech hub, now a population puzzle, Rochester was once a symbol of American ingenuity. Eastman, Kodak, Xerox, Bosch, and Lom companies that once defined innovation. But innovation without renewal becomes nostalgia. As global shifts happened, jobs dispersed. Factories closed. Young workers moved to the coast. Rochester's population followed. The city peaked mid-20th century and entered a long decline. What's different here is that Rochester never stabilized at a new base. Instead, it bounced between slight dips and shallow recoveries, but the general trend remains downward. This is important because real estate depends on consistent, long-term demand. Rochester hasn't offered that in decades. Schools lose enrollment. Neighborhoods age. Investors look elsewhere. And when people stop moving in and start moving out, property values become hostage to the demographic reality. Number 4. Cleveland, Ohio. The city that lost its pull. Cleveland is another industrial heartland city with a long decline in population, from over 900,000 in 1950 to around 380,000 today. That's more than half the population gone. Why does that matter? Because population decline doesn't just shrink city boundaries. It changes the mix of residents. Younger, educated workers leave older. Less mobile residents remain, job opportunities become scarce, services struggle to survive. In cities like Cleveland, the tax base collapses not just nominally, but in value per capita. And property values are directly tied to job markets, disposable income, retail activity, school quality, future prospects. When people leave en masse, every one of these factors weakens. Cleveland isn't dying, but its housing market is constrained by demographics. Number 5, Youngstown, Ohio, small town, big decline. Youngstown is a smaller city, one that once thrived on steel. But as industry moved out, Youngstown's population fell dramatically. At one point near 170,000 residents, it now sits below 60,000. This isn't cyclical, it's structural. A loss of jobs becomes a loss of residents, becomes a loss of demand. Properties become vacant, not because they're bad homes, but because there are fewer people to buy. And in Youngstown, that turning point happened decades ago. Homes are cheap, yes, but cheap homes in a declining market are not bargains. They are liabilities. Because the pool of serious buyers is tiny. Growth doesn't just slow, it reverses. Number 6. Buffalo suburbs and rural exodus. Buffalo's surrounding region shows another kind of decline. Not the city itself, but the periphery. What we're seeing in parts of upstate New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania is rural and small-town exodus. Young people leave for big cities. School enrollment drops. Hospitals shrink services. Public infrastructure struggles. When the outer rings of a city lose population, the effects ripple inward. Commuter demand drops. Local businesses fail. Neighborhood vitality weakens. This is a different kind of decline. Not dramatic, but cumulative. Number 7. Springfield, Massachusetts. Where population decline weakens neighborhoods. Springfield has lost population steadily over several decades. The trend isn't sudden, but it is persistent. This persistence matters because persistent decline rewrites expectations. Homebuyers don't just see weaker demand, they expect weaker demand. Once that expectation sets in, real estate stops appreciating. Investors retreat, lenders become conservative, listings stagnate, and stagnation is the silent killer of property values. Number 8. Peoria, Illinois, Midwest. Decline in slow motion. Peoria, the once a vibrant industrial and agricultural hub, has seen decades of slow population loss. This loss is not dramatic, it's not shocking, it's steady. But steady declines endure far longer than dramatic ones. And what makes Peoria's case critical is this: when population decline becomes the norm, buyers demand risk discounts. Homes don't sell at peak prices, they sell at prices that reflect future uncertainty. That's how Peoria's housing market has already shifted. Number 9. Buffalo and Rochester suburbs. Secondary effects? Buffalo and Rochester don't just lose people within the city limits. Their suburban and exurban rings also feel the impact. Commuter belts become less appealing. Schools lose funding. Service economies shrink. So even areas that look fine on paper become part of the same demographic story. Population decline is neither contained nor isolated. It spreads. Number 10. Small coastal and Rust Belt towns. Some of the most surprising cases are small coastal towns and Rust Belt boroughs, not major cities, not headline news. But places like Erie, Pennsylvania, Youngstown's smaller neighbors, coastal towns losing jobs and fisheries. Former manufacturing towns with shrinking populations. These towns don't make national news, but their housing markets tell a clear story. No population growth equals no housing demand equals downward pressure on prices. The real estate consequences of population loss. Population decline affects housing in very direct ways. 1. Fewer buyers. A shrinking population literally means fewer potential owners. 2. Lower demand. Less movement into an area reduces competition for homes. 3. Drop in appraisals. Homes are appraised lower because future demand is weaker. 4. Longer time on market properties sit longer, eroding perceived value. 5. Higher vacancy vacant houses breed lower prices, their supply without demand. 6. Declining schools and hospitals lose funds, arrow neighborhoods become less attractive. Why this trend is permanent for many places. This is not a short-term blip. This is structural decline caused by job losses, aging populations, younger generation migration, automation displacing workers, lack of new industry, housing markets tied to declining economic fundamentals.